paper reports that two of the male prostitutes were given a late-night tour of the White House last year.
You want answers. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Bryant, and welcome to the Nick Bryant Podcast. Today, my guest is Deana Pollard Sacks. She is a former law professor and also an author. How are you doing tonight, Deana?
Pretty good. How are you, Nick?
I'm good. You wrote a couple of books, The Godfathers of Sexual Abuse, Volume 1, and The Godfathers of Sexual Abuse, Volume 2. In Volume 1, you focused on Jeffrey Epstein, and in Volume 2, you focused on Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein.
Right.
So let's talk about Volume 1 first. What are your general thoughts about the Epstein case?
Well, the thing that struck me the most and that bothered me the most was the way the government attorneys helped him. I did not expect to find that. That for me was just incomprehensible. This is a person who molested probably thousands of little girls as young as 12. This is a person who's really, really sick. And what was really striking to me was some of the accounts about how certain people like Kirshner down there, the state attorney general down in Florida, originally was gung-ho, let's put this guy away. And then Alan Dershowitz came to town and met with him apparently, and he completely changed his tune. So Alan Dershowitz had gone after the girls. For example, one of the girls, I guess, had gotten an abortion and her parents didn't know. I think she was Catholic, and that kind of information was let out. Another young girl had put something on either a Facebook or something like that, one of those MySpace type posts about how she liked marijuana, and that came out. And so it was really a case of attack the plaintiffs, and really go after the girls. And when Alan Dershowitz came down to Palm Beach, at that time, I guess he was living in New York, and he came into town to help his client, Jeffrey Epstein, a lot of things started happening. Some girls had relatives who were run off the road and things like that. There were a lot of threats, subtle threats, sometimes more direct threats, and the government's participation in that, and especially the government's participation in allowing him all sorts of benefits that other prisoners do not get. He was in an empty stockade, like a fairgrounds type place by himself, had the whole building to himself. That's not a prison. And then he got work release, which is unheard of for someone with a record like that. And he actually set up an office and was meeting little girls during his so-called prison sentence. It was a joke. The whole thing was a joke. So I was really surprised by the government's participation in helping him get away with it. And Alexander Acosta as well. And his little, sidekick, Marie Villafania. These people were attorney generals. We were paying their, salaries as, they were U.S. attorneys. Acosta was, and making all this money and then actually helping him. The whole thing was just shocking to me about how much our government participated. And it turns out that the same thing happened with Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein. Harvey had Cy Vance in New York helping him, and many others, Andrew Cuomo, others as well. And then Bill Cosby had someone named Bruce Castor in Philadelphia helping him. So all of these predators had our attorneys, our government attorneys that we're paying for, helping them.
What the federal government did, or the Department of Justice, was incomprehensibly egregious when it came to Jeffrey Epstein.
Mm-hmm.
But I have seen this before. I wrote a book called The Franklin Scandal, a story of power brokers, child abuse, and betrayal. And it was like a mirror image almost of what happened with Epstein, except the Department of Justice has said that there was actually no children abused by that particular network. And the kids, I mean, they were just expunged. And there was a couple of kids who refused to recant their abuse. And one of them was Alicia Owen. She was sentenced between 9 and 15 years in prison for perjury. And she spent nearly 2 years in solitary confinement. So although it's impossible to quantify pain, the victims of the Franklin scandal aren't even legally, they're not even victims the way that the victims of the Epstein scandal were. But so I saw that happen. And I think this is with the Franklin scandal, I definitely believe that it was some malignant corner of our intelligence that was using those kids to compromise politicians. And I think the same thing happened with Epstein. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would take a huge step back here and look at what's happened over the past, say, half century. Alfred Kinsey came out with these bogus reports on sexuality in the human male and female, and those reports were not accurate. Eventually, scientifically, they were found to be not accurate. But those reports triggered Hugh Hefner's decision to start a magazine to fill the gap, as he said, left by the Kinsey reports. He said the public was hungry for more information. People were abuzz with the content of the Kinsey reports. And so people were curious now. And a lot of people felt like they were left out, like they didn't know everyone was engaging in all these unusual sexual practices. And this is why they wanted more information on what's really going on. Of course, as we know now, it wasn't true. Most of what Kinsey wrote was not true at all. His findings were the result of interviewing fraternity brothers and people from halfway houses, people whose sexuality does not reflect the average American. And so it just wasn't, it looked like a scientific study, so the public bought it. So that all triggered this whole pornography movement, I would say, starting with Hugh Hefner and Playboy, because then Hustler came out, then people got more and more desensitized, and then the pornography industry blew up. And we know from a lot of research that pornography does affect people's thoughts about sexuality, and it's very addictive for a lot of people. And I think if you look at it in a very broad view, what happened was a lot of Americans became addicted to sex, addicted to unusual sex. The ideas about what is appropriate and inappropriate in sexual relations changed, and a lot of sexual addiction occurred. And so I think that all of this plays a role in, powerful men have always done things other men can't do or can't get away with. And when it comes to sex, that's especially true. Look what the kings did. I mean, some kings would deflower every single maid, in the entire region just because he could. So I think that you have to look at it all together and see how pornography affected our society, the demand for all kinds of sex, and younger people in particular. Look at the people in pornography flicks. I mean, I haven't seen a lot, but I have seen some, because my students told me, if you're going to write about this, you should at least see some. And most of them are very young. They may be 18 or 19, but some of them look really young. So I believe pornography drove this market to a large degree of just people wanting all kinds of sex that is not traditionally sanctioned in our society. And it got, the government offices were infiltrated with the same problems to a higher degree, because privileged people always get away with more. And so people with a lot of money, a lot of power, tend to do a lot of drugs. I'm saying more than the average American who, is holding down a job at Home Depot, let's just say. So you've got this entitled group. They partake of whatever hedonistic opportunities are out there. And that's why they have to cover up for others who maybe aren't in the government, because those people, like Jeffrey Epstein, have dirt on many government people and even heads of state. A former prime minister of Israel, for example, Urad Barak. There's just all these people in his little black book. Of course, everyone claimed they don't know how they got in his little black book. Everyone claimed that. But it's a system that is so vile and so expansive that it definitely has infiltrated our government. And so there you have it. Our government attorneys are protecting the bad guys.
Well, they're worse than bad guys. I mean, our government attorneys are protecting child molesters, which I think is the lowest of the low as far as criminality goes.
Mhm.
It's interesting. There was a book written by David Simon. He was a Berkeley professor, and it was called Elite Deviance. And I've mentioned it on my podcast before.
Mhm.
And elite deviance is not something that's new. I mean, Alexander Hamilton, there's a number of hagiographies that have come out about our founding fathers, but Alexander Hamilton was actually having an affair with a 23-year-old woman, and her husband was blackmailing Alexander Hamilton.
Wow.
And what's really interesting, there was a muckraking journalist who found out about this and outed Alexander Hamilton as being shaken down by this guy, and also outed him as having this affair. And this muckraking journalist thought that Jefferson and Hamilton were highly antagonistic. And so when Jefferson became president, this muckraker thought that Jefferson owed him an appointment and to his administration. And when Jefferson didn't give him an appointment, he outed Jefferson about having sex with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings. So sexual latitude and blackmail have always gone hand in hand, especially when you get into men of power.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's always been that way. If you look at some of the documentaries or docudramas, and they, probably embellish a little bit, but they bring a lot out about how the kings treated women. And I'm not just talking about, beheading their wives as it was convenient, but also just, having no sense of sexual propriety, and no one could say anything because they were the king. And there's an old saying, the greater the truth, the greater the slander, because it used to be the case where you could not say anything bad about the king, and truth was not a defense. And that's how that term came out, the greater the truth, the greater the slander. People knew what they were doing, they couldn't say anything. And unfortunately, we still have that same dynamic in place, where people who are wealthy do all sorts of things they shouldn't be doing. And I really believe pornography and all that came with it has increased the appetite for sex that in the past would be considered deviant, criminal, and actually still is deviant and criminal, but it's become accepted at a level that it's just shocking. And that's really part of an even bigger scheme, where people who are entitled, people who were born into money, get all the spots on CNN. They get everything. They get the journalism spots, they get the spots in government, they get the spots in Hollywood. We do not have a country where there's equal opportunity to succeed. And some of the smartest, most attractive, most talented people never get a chance, because those spots are taken by people who can buy their way in. But we also know in Hollywood, women who are pretty enough, women who are talented enough can get in, but they have to sleep with someone. So it's back to kind of the same thing, is we've got to find a way to shake up this country enough where the best and the brightest are allowed to rise and are allowed to lead us, because we're being led by a lot of dirtbags who happen to come from a lot of money, and they're not even that smart. A lot of them are not very smart.
A few shows ago, I had Donald Jeffries on, and he wrote a book called Survival of the Richest. And he really shows how nepotism plays an integral role in upward mobility, and that we're living in a plutocracy, and that the middle class is starting to disintegrate. Right. And his book captures all of that. And what's really interesting, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And I have a tendency to believe that the rich are getting more deviant.
Yeah, I think so.
As they're getting richer. I came across Epstein's Black Book in 2012, and I was able to put it on the internet in 2015. And when I first started looking at the names in that Black Book, I was stunned in a certain way, but then because I knew I'd written the Franklin scandal, so I know that a number of our power brokers are deviants.
Yeah.
But it was nonetheless still shocking to me that and Alfredo Rodriguez, who was Epstein's house manager, circled people that were in cahoots with Jeffrey Epstein, and you can go look at the Black Book that I put up, and you'll see a number of names are circled.
I think those circles, though, may mean those are people who Rodriguez knew as a fact had sex with children. It's my understanding from reading a
Yes.
lot about it. I talk about you in my book too, and what happened to, is it called Gaffer, the website that was wiped out? The one you put it on was it, what was the name of it?
Gawker.
Gawker, that's it, Gawker.
They were the
And
only
then,
ones willing to publish the Black Book.
right, and they were also the only ones willing to talk about the Clintons and what they were doing. And then, they got sued by Hulk Hogan, and it knocked out Gawker completely. I mean, they were unable to survive that enormous judgment of many millions of dollars when someone got a sex tape of Hulk Hogan and put it online. So I always wondered about that, and whether that was contrived to knock out Gawker, because it was the only website really bringing this stuff to the public.
With that, Gawker outed Peter Thiel. He was one of the co-founders of PayPal, and Peter Thiel decided, and he was closeted, and Peter Thiel decided that he would finance anyone that would bring a lawsuit against Gawker. And he's a billionaire, so he had tremendous amount of money, and he was the one that financed Hulk Hogan's case against Gawker.
I'm not surprised. Exactly. So they wanted to knock him out. And this is the problem with money being so concentrated, is that these few people have so much power. And the only positive thing I'll say with two things. One is those people with so much money and power are starting to fight among themselves. What else is new, right? Bad people, will connect sometimes to oppress an entire society or civilization, but then they always end up getting in fights too, because they're all just so full of themselves and so far from righteousness and truth. And the other thing is that the American public is really waking up to the fact that we are not getting the opportunities we should be getting. We're watching these actresses on Hollywood screens that aren't even that good half the time, but they're the ones willing to sleep with Harvey Weinstein or whatever. We're watching people on CNN like, Anderson Cooper, who comes from massive money. He's not talented. He's not good. I don't know him personally, but I can't even stand watching him. He's not, these people just aren't worthy of those positions, but they get them because they come from so much wealth. And the American public is tired of it. They want to see their kid have a shot. They may have a brilliant young son who would just be so much better than someone like Anderson Cooper, and look better too, and smarter and everything. They don't get the chance. So America really is not a land of opportunity anymore. And I think people are really starting to see that, and it's getting worse with the rich getting richer and the middle class shrinking. So maybe there'll be some kind of backlash to all of that. I'm not sure how that would work, but I have some ideas and I have some plans, and I just started my own 501c3 to pursue litigation as a starting point, and getting rid of some of the structures in our government that I don't think they've ever been constitutional. They need to be dismantled.
You were a law professor for 20 years, and you're obviously plugged into the legal profession. And so we had Epstein walk, but we knew that Epstein molested all these girls, and he essentially walked until he was arrested. But he trafficked girls for about 25 years. And the deal that was made with him by Alexander Acosta, who was the U.S. attorney for Southern District at that point, Southern District, Florida, was laughable. And as you said before, the grand jury that was prosecuted by Kirshner was also laughable. So could lawyers congeal to take on this particular injustice? No one seems to be congealing to take on this particular injustice. What do you see? And it's one thing I don't want to let go of. I don't want to see. I saw a lot of kids molested with impunity in the Franklin scandal, and there's a lot of kids that were molested with impunity in the Epstein scandal. And I would think that there would be some facet of our society that would really want to take this on. So with the media, were you shocked that the media did not call for justice? We seem to have ethical eunuchs in the Department of Justice and ethical eunuchs in the media.
Well, at first I was. By the way, it's Godfathers of Sex Abuse. The books are called Godfathers of Sex Abuse, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Until I started learning about who owns the media companies. At first, I thought, I was a little bit naive. I thought reporters are people who like law professors, are supposed to be people who want to tell the truth, are willing to go against the grain, take it as their own mission in life to defend the public's right to know, those sorts of things. That's why we have tenure as law professors, so we can go out and speak freely and not get fired. But the more I saw, for example, Ghislaine Maxwell, her father is Robert Maxwell. He's, of course, dead now. His body was found floating near the Canary Islands not long after it was discovered that he stole most of the pension away from, I think it was the Daily Mirror. He owned the Daily Mirror. See,
He owned a number of
people,
media, yeah.
well, the people who own the media are really, really wealthy people. And they own the media companies because they want to control the narrative. We all know about the programming effects of media. I happen to have some expertise in this based on cognitive learning theory. And I was doing basically a dissertation a long time ago about how racial biases and gender biases begin in the brain, how they grow, how they strengthen, all that kind of stuff. And it's implicit bias. It becomes implicit after so much repetition through jokes, through songs, through content in television, whatever. So we know that over a period of time, if you hear the same thing over and over and over, your brain will program in a certain way, almost like a computer. Even if you disagree with the message, if you hear the message enough times, your brain has a natural tendency to assume that message is true unconsciously, to sort of just associate those things together. For example, beautiful blondes being stupid, like the Pamela Anderson type character. That's something that has been so entrenched through jokes and TV and everything else that a lot of people harbor those kinds of implicit biases, and they don't mean to, and they don't know that they're doing it. But also, if you look at the whole concept behind Sesame Street and how we knew that if children were able to have the cognitive base, through education, there's a little part that, one of these things is not like the others. One of these things just doesn't belong. Where they're teaching kids to differentiate and to create those connections in their brains that they need as foundational connections to get things right later in life. So the media does that. The media programs us. The media changes our values, our thoughts, our implicit associations. And we've known that for a long time. And so I always, when people say, what do we do? What do I do? I say, turn off your TV. Turn it off. Protect yourself. And people just are so addicted to television because this content is addictive. I mean, look what's on TV, violence and sex. Well, both of those things are addictive. We know this from the violent video game sales and the lawsuit against the video manufacturers in California, which lost in the Supreme Court. So in that fact, that's how I started my program. I talked to Ed Donnerstein and Vic Strasberg, and I said, let's do a program. So we're being programmed to believe certain things. We're being programmed in a way that it's hard for us to believe that our politicians who are up there shiny and smiling, that they're doing these things to children. There's such an incredible block for our people to see what's going on. And they don't even believe it sometimes. You talk about, or talk about something that happened with Jeffrey Epstein, and they just act, that's hard to believe. Maybe someone had it out for him. And thinking, where are you getting that from? It's their cognitive associations. They cannot break down the expectations. They cannot believe someone who's a U.S. attorney would protect someone like that. It's just they've managed to really come at us on so many different grounds that people are just not able to see through it all.
Cognitive dissonance is the word, or is the phrase for it. 6 corporations own 90% of the media. And I'd heard that for a number of years. And I looked into it a while back just to make sure that 6 corporations, it used to be that you could not, there weren't monopolies in the media like there are today. Okay. And but because of legislation from Reagan and Bush 1 and Bush 2, and Clinton and Bush 2, I mean, the media is heavily consolidated. And that really does trouble me, because for me, I do not write subject matter that is compatible with the mainstream media. And it's very difficult for me to get my work published.
Right. I mean, that's why all these little podcasts are popping up all over the place, because those of us who want to report correctly and accurately will never get on CNN. probably won't get on Fox either. I mean, we probably won't get on any of the major stations that have millions of viewers, because they don't want this message to come out. They want to keep us marginalized and call us, kooks and things like that, so that people won't listen to us. There's a lot of bullying going on, a lot of sort of slander going on, where they will humiliate a person telling the truth so that everyone will shy away from them because they don't want to be associated with them because of their concern over social sanctions for being associated with someone who is being shunned by the majority. So there's a lot of game playing going on. I just wish our people would wake up and say, use your own common sense here and turn off the television by all means.
And a lot of people get stamped with the imprimatur conspiracy theorist. That is the worst thing that you can be stamped with, is as a conspiracy theorist, because people, when they hear a conspiracy theory, they just kind of shut down.
Right.
And I spent 7 years of my life proving a book, called the Franklin Scandal, where I proved a lot of it with sealed grand jury documentation and testimony, and also with I found a lot of people that were part of it, both on the good side and on the bad side, and a number of victims. But Wikipedia says that the Franklin Scandal is a fiction, and Facebook says that the Franklin Scandal is a fiction. So I am going up against Wikipedia and Facebook.
But you have the documents right in the book. They're published right in the book. You have
yes, they are.
Are they saying they're fake documents too? And that's what I'm talking about. People are so fundamentally insecure. We have a very, very insecure population in this country, and they've been made insecure by the content of television and the content of commercials. If you're not a size 2 and you're a female, you're a loser. If you're a man and you're not worth at least $5 million, you're a loser. They have given this message to our people for so long, while at the same time pushing commercials that make people crave food that will make them fat and unhealthy. I mean, if you look at it, was Vic Strasberger who wrote a book called Children, Adolescents, and the Media. And he combines all these different studies about how the media has, contributed greatly to the children being overweight, being insecure, being depressed, having certain ideas about sexuality. This has all been programmed in our kids. And so you get a group of people like that, a whole American civilization that are fundamentally so insecure. What do insecure people do? They look for others who will support them. They want to be a part of the majority. They want to be part of the main crowd. They don't want to be an outlier. And guess what? The main crowd is controlled by the rich people. So if you get called a conspiracy theorist, all of a sudden you are an outlier. But you can't read my book on Jeffrey Epstein. And by the way, I rely largely on legal documents and New York Times and other, very prominent media sources. You cannot read that book and say there was no conspiracy going on. Certainly there was conspiracy between Alan Dershowitz, Alexandra Acosta, Marie Villafana. I mean, clearly they were colluding. We know this. And in fact, the Judge Mara down in the Southern District of Florida, when he found out that Acosta and Dershowitz went behind the victims' backs and created this bogus, ridiculous settlement agreement with Epstein, which violated the Crime Victims' Rights Act, clearly. He went off on them, and I wrote him a letter, actually, Judge Mara, and said, thank you so much for having the guts to do the right thing. So he found that they were doing things that were technically a conspiracy. I mean, and conspiracy doesn't have to necessarily be a crime. We usually call it concert of action in the civil context. We don't usually say conspiracy in the civil context. Sometimes we do, but it's the same thing. All it means is 2 or more people have the same agenda and they're working together. The conspiracies are everywhere, all the time. I was an employment lawyer for years. Even in the employment context, 2 employees will get together and say, let's both accuse Ted of sexual harassment, because if we both accuse him, he's going to get fired. And they're right. If you get 2 or 3 women together to make the same complaint, that man is going to be in big trouble with his job. But that is a conspiracy. That is a concert of action. It's everywhere. Anyone who thinks there aren't conspiracies they've been living under a rock for their entire lives. Conspiracies are all over the place.
The RICO legislation shows that, that's all about conspiracies, and that should have been deployed against Epstein at all. What should have happened with Epstein is you have a number of procurers that you could have arrested and indicted for child trafficking, which can carry a life sentence, and then give them, 6 or 7 life sentences, and then they're going to turn on the power brokers for sure. And that didn't happen at all with the Epstein case. The Epstein case was a perfect example of a RICO prosecution. That something that could have been a RICO prosecution, and it was not. And it was a cover-up.
Well, unfortunately, the judges go along with it too. And, a lot of people think, well, they're federal judges, you can't do anything about it. Well, actually, you can. You can impeach a federal judge. It's not easy. Same standard high crimes and misdemeanors, treason, clearly, and other high crimes and misdemeanors is the language. But that's something we have to really look at. That's something that my new organization is going to look at, is what does that mean exactly? And to me, if a federal judge is being cruel toward minority and women plaintiffs in Title VII cases, and there's one in Houston that has been spanked by the Fifth Circuit repeatedly for being so nasty and dismissing cases that clearly have merit. And I guess he told one plaintiff, a minority female, that he's going to squish her like a bug or something like that. I'm going to squish you under my thumb or something in court. And so the Fifth Circuit has sort of, issued sanctions, informal, just statements against him, and then transferred his cases to the judges. Why isn't that person being impeached? Why? He's 85 or something like that now. He's still in there doing the same thing. One of my colleagues at the law school I worked at has been in court and has seen him make misogynist comments. And she told me just the other day, his clerks are just cringing. His female clerks, like, oh my God, what do we do? Why is he in office? What, to me, if you're aiding and abetting civil rights violations, sexual harassment, sexual assault in a university, and that's what they're doing, these are usually university cases, that should be grounds for impeachment. And so when my entity gets up and running, it's called Lord Advocates, after the Scottish Lord Advocate, which is the highest attorney in the land, and right now happens to be a female in Scotland. But we're going to be doing things a little differently. I'm the president, and we're going to be looking at what do we need to do to create some kind of consequences among these people in positions of power who think they're immune, because they're not immune, and no one's had the creative sense of how to fix this, how to get at these people, how to get them removed from office. And it might start as an impeachment proceeding, but it may end with them just resigning, because sometimes it works that way. So it's not that we necessarily are going to get a conviction in the Senate, but if we start a process, maybe a few judges will step down. More importantly, the normative effects. Cass Sunstein's done a lot of work on the normative effects of the law, or the normative effects of whatever, aspect of the law, drunk driving laws, for example. It isn't necessarily so much that so many people get convicted, but people start changing their beliefs. It's called a norm cascade. Again, that's Cass Sunstein's term. A norm cascade is where people start thinking of things differently. And people didn't used to think drunk driving was that big of a deal, everyone does it or whatever, but they started really tightening up the laws and making it a very serious crime in California, and then advertising it. The advertising it's what got so much traction in the drunk driving problem of California, and people then found out. And then the same thing with spanking in Sweden. They made it illegal to spank your child, and they put the law on milk cartons. And the reason they put the law, this back in the 70s, the reason they put the law on milk cartons is because in Sweden, people have a cultural habit of putting the carton of milk on the dinner table during dinner. It's there the whole time. So people will look at it during the whole dinner period, and they use it, of course, to fill up their milk glass. But the point is, they want everyone to know this law is in place. Was anyone ever prosecuted for spanking? No. Did spanking stop? Yes, it did, if you look at Sweden. So the idea, we have to get our people on board with what's right and wrong. We've got to use creative means. Milk cartons, maybe, I don't know. We've got to find ways to reach our people, because most of us, the vast majority of Americans, agree with what we're saying. This should not go on. These people should not be in office. The entitled people should not be governing us like a shepherd governing a bunch of sheep. We're not sheep. Half the time we're smarter than they are, and we're being governed by them. We need to really take some action, serious action in the courts and otherwise, to really raise awareness and start plucking out some of the worst. I would go for the worst judges. I would go for the judges first who have a record in the courts of appeal of being reprimanded. There's your case. See, no one's doing this. And people say, oh, you can't impeach a federal judge. Yes, you can. It has been done. Normally, it's going to be bribe. They've taken bribes, or they have, a stake in the outcome of the case. They didn't recuse themselves. But when you talk about high crimes and misdemeanors, that we need to really flesh out what that means. And I think it means a lot more. And I think it encompasses a lot of what is going on in the federal courts. Not all courts, and lots of federal courts are fabulous men and women, very committed men and women. But there's also a significant number who do things all the time that are wrong.
You talked about the Crime Victims' Rights Act, and that was heavily trampled on in the Epstein case. What that law says is that victims, in this case, victims of sexual abuse, have to be aware of what the prosecutors are, what type of deal the prosecutors are making with their perpetrator, and
they have to have the opportunity to be heard.
Absolutely,
have the notice of the proceedings. You see, because any kind of settlement normally has to be kissed by a judge, and so there's going to be a proceeding at some point, or papers filed at some point to ask the judge to stamp, the settlement and make it a judgment. It's not a judgment until the judge rules it's a judgment. So there's just going to be usually a hearing. And these females were never told about these hearings since they never had an opportunity to be heard. And that's why Judge Mara down in the Epstein case his orders sounded pretty incensed. I quoted a lot of it in my first book on Jeffrey Epstein. But yeah, they didn't just not notify them, they lied to them. They were sending out information to Brad Edwards, who was one of the attorneys, and lying to him, saying, yeah, we're in the process, we're looking into it. They had already signed settlement papers, and they were telling the plaintiff's lawyer for months that they hadn't signed settlement papers. And in fact, they were asking Brad Edwards to do all sorts of legwork to create more evidence for them to help them prosecute Jeffrey Epstein, while all along they had already signed a settlement agreement. And that means Brad Edwards is out there spending a ton of time of his time working up a case that had already been settled. It was really abusive in Jeffrey Epstein's case.
And the rationale that the federal appellate court gave was pretty nonsensical. What happened in the Jeffrey Epstein case is the Department of Justice told the state to indict Epstein on one count of adult pandering and one count of child abuse. And the state did, in fact, indict Epstein. He was given 18 months for that and spent 13 months in a county jail. But that was all at the directive of the federal government. Now, when that case was challenged, where the victims weren't informed what was going on with the federal prosecutors, right, the government said that because it was a deal that was made by the state, those victims weren't liable. Those victims weren't, as far as the Crime Victims' Rights Act, they didn't have protection by it. And that, to me, is just really, really egregious.
The arguments made by some of the attorneys were so bad. I would not put my name. I'd be embarrassed to put my name to those arguments. They're ridiculous arguments. I know, I wrote all about in the book, The Godfathers of Sex Abuse, Book 1, about what took place in the courts and how they made these ridiculous arguments. And Judge Mara really kind of reamed them for those stupid arguments. Meanwhile, Ken Starr had gone to the Department of Justice making equally ridiculous arguments, trying to get them to drop, charges. These people had no, they don't even have any pride. I would not make those arguments because they were such ridiculous arguments. I would never. I can't believe they would be willing to do that. But a lot of money changed hands too. I can't even imagine how much money Alan Dershowitz was paid by Jeffrey Epstein in relation to this Florida prosecution, but I would guess in the millions. I don't know how much Ken Starr was paid, but I would guess a lot of money. And remember, Baylor had, was it Baylor or SMU? I think it was Baylor who had Ken Starr as the dean, and might have been, I can't remember, might have been SMU, whatever, one of the big Texas schools. And when he was basically caught sweeping sexual harassment and sexual assault charges under the rug in violation of Title IX, so the female students were not getting any kind of relief from this. They let him go, but they gave him a $4.5 million severance package. I mean, that's a reward for doing, that's a reward to me. That's crazy. So it's not just the government, it's also private universities doing this sort of thing, or looking the other way, or putting people in power who look the other way. And, you know, and then giving them a $4.5 million severance package when they get caught doing something wrong. It's mind-boggling.
I think Dershowitz had some skin in the game, according to some of the Epstein survivors, and he was doing it for self-preservation of his pristine name, and I think that although a lot of pressure was obviously put on Virginia Giuffre to recant what she said about Alan Dershowitz, I think that people are onto Alan Dershowitz at this point and realize that he's a human malignancy.
Absolutely. But here's the thing that's funny about that story. Virginia, I believe, had just turned 17 when she had sex with Alan Dershowitz. Technically, in the state they were in, that was legal. Is it pedophilia? In my opinion, I mean, it's disgusting. He was in his 50s. Can you imagine how she felt with that? Ugh, it's disgusting. I mean, I can just tell you, women do a lot of things sometimes they don't want to do because they need money or they need something, you know, dating someone 30 years old or 40 years old or whatever. It's, you know, that those women are not attracted to someone 30 or 40 years older than them. They never are. So they're doing it for some other reason. But I think Alan Dershowitz is just smart enough to sort of slide right under the law. And I think technically, legally, when they had sex, it may not have been a crime in that state. Now in California, it would be, because the age difference is so large. So California has like a scale, a sliding scale. So if a man is 19 and the female is 17, that's a statutory rape technically, but I'm not even sure that would qualify. I think it would. I'm not sure the age for it, but when you get the big gaps, when you get a 40-year-old having sex with a 15-year-old, that's when you get really big sanctions in California. So I don't know about, I think they might have been in Florida. I'm not sure, but whatever it was, I think he actually.
I think Florida is actually 18 years old.
Oh, is it? Okay, well then, I'm not sure. I remember at one point hearing the stories and wherever she was when she was with him, I remember at some point looking into it and saying, I'm not sure that it was actually a crime, but he still lied about it. And it was still disgusting. I mean, she's still just a girl. 17 is just a girl. Even 18, when the guy is in his 50s, that's very close to pedophilia. It's something like it. It's a cousin of pedophilia. Even if it's not illegal, even if she's 18, even if she was of age and he's 60 or 55, that's along the same lines. It's not normal to want someone that much younger than you. That's not healthy. It's weird.
And she was coerced too, which exacerbates. So in Godfathers of Sexual Abuse Volume 2, you get into Bill Cosby. Let's talk a little bit about Mr. Cosby.
Awful. I mean, the man is brilliant in numerous ways. He was a very good kid, did extremely well in school, was friendly, everyone liked him. He was very popular, very good son, according to his mother, and did well very young and became huge. I mean, he was worth about 400 million at some point, maybe more. He was very, very wealthy. And he developed a habit of wanting to sleep with a lot of different young women. And I don't know that any were underage. I think one might have been 16 or 17, but it wasn't like he was a pedophile. It was more like he was just a pervert who wanted sex with women. And he found that it was a lot easier to get sex with women if you slipped Quaaludes or something into their drinks, or somehow got them to take a pill and tell them it was a contact when it was actually something else that would make them pass out. He had sex with women who were in states of partially, I mean, they weren't even fully awake. They were, some of them described knowing what was going on, but they were unable to move because they had been drugged at that level. And he did it out openly. A lot of people in Hollywood, after it all came out, said, you know, we should have done something. we knew what he was doing. He was known to slip drugs to women and to rape them in that manner. So it wasn't like a gun to the head or a violent, vicious rape. It was more, he took away the women's ability to move, literally to fight back or to know what was going on. And he actually had sex with women who were completely passed out. Some of the women described they woke up and they were in pain, and there was evidence that they'd had sexual intercourse, but they had no memory at all. So he's a really very sick man. And he got away with it for so long, in part because, well, as one of the Black women said, she didn't want to come forward because he was an iconic Black man, and she didn't want to bring down one of the few, very, very wealthy, successful Black men in the country. She wanted to protect his image as a Black man. That was part of it. And just people liked him. I mean, I never liked him, but people thought he was just great and funny. And I don't know why I never saw anything in him, but people liked him, and they didn't want to be the one to call him out. And then, of course, in Hollywood, he had so much power, so much money, that people, if they called him out, they would never get a job again in Hollywood. They'd be blacklisted. So, like Harvey Weinstein specifically told people, I will blacklist you, or you will never work in this town again. And so it wasn't just that he was paying so many people's paychecks. It was also the fact that they knew if they said anything, they'd be blacklisted from the entire industry, all of Hollywood. They'll never work again. And that's kind of what happened to Ashley Judd with Harvey Weinstein. I mean, she was set to be in the trilogy, what's it called? The big, slipped my mind right now, but the one that became a trilogy that was so popular.
Shrek?
No, the one.
Okay, just
I want to say Game of Thrones. I know it's not that. It's I can't remember offhand, but anyway, she was set to be in it. She was actually actually told, which role would you like? And when she turned him down at the Peninsula Hotel, she found out 20 years later that he had told one of the producers that she's a nightmare to work with and that she should be basically let go. And she brought a lawsuit in 2018, 20 years later, whatever it was, because she just found out. And Weinstein moved to have that tossed out on limitations grounds. And the court said no, because she couldn't have reasonably found out back then, because no one back then would take on Harvey Weinstein or disclose what he did to her career. And look what happened to her career. She's a beautiful, good actress, and she never really took off because, Lord of the Rings, it's Lord of the Rings, right? It became, so she was hurt really badly by his misconduct. And, we don't even find out about it. She would have been a superstar. I mean, have you seen Ashley Judd and anything? I think she's tremendous. And she got just stepped on by this man because she wouldn't play ball. That's what I'm talking about when we see these actresses in Hollywood on TV, and they're not the most talented, they're not the prettiest, but they're the ones who would do whatever they had to do to get the roles. Whereas people like Ashley Judd, who are truly beautiful and talented, they're taken out of our vision, and we don't get to see them on the screen because they didn't do things that the men wanted them to do.
With Bill Cosby, there was some amazing hypocrisy. Lisa Bonet was on in a show, and she was scantily clad in angel heart, and Bill Cosby publicly excoriated her for that. Meanwhile, he's drugging women into unconsciousness and molesting them.
It's unbelievable. I know.
And I kind of want, I mean, I can't imagine that. I mean, I've wondered, is he a necrophiliac too? I mean, is that his thing? I mean, he's
a really sick man. I mean, a lot of these people were Epstein and Weinstein and Cosby all grew up without a lot of money. And I think that might have played a role. Certainly with Weinstein and Epstein, they really, really were determined to make a lot of money because they wanted the things that money could buy. They came from a household of very meager means and saw other people with the things they'd like to have. And Jeffrey Epstein and Harvey Weinstein share in common a sexual problem. Neither one of them could get a full erection or sustain it. I don't think Bill Cosby had that particular problem. His problem was more power. and probably a lot of rejection as a young man. He's not attractive, Bill Cosby. None of these men are attractive. I've had people say they thought Jeffrey Epstein was reasonably attractive. I don't know what they saw. I saw someone who looked like there was something wrong genetically with him. I don't think he looks normal or healthy at all. But anyway, regardless of that, these are men who did not do well with women young, and Epstein did not do well with women young. He didn't do well with women. I mean, he was using his position as a Victoria's Secret sort of a colleague, I guess, you know, of the owner, and he still couldn't get women. So I think what happened with Bill Cosby, which is similar to Weinstein and Epstein, is that when they finally got a lot of money, they tried to sort of undo all their junior high school insecurities by having sex with a lot of different women to sort of prove to themselves that they are desirable, but they're not. And using money or using drugs to get women to say yes, or to be so obliterated they don't know what's going on, that is not the same as being accepted by the opposite sex. But I noticed these things in common with these men, that they did not have success with the opposite sex young. And it took a lot of money before they were able to get any kind of response from the opposite sex. And then Cosby just found it easier to drug them. And he admitted in a deposition that he used Quaaludes like another man might use a martini. You know, that's how he saw it. And that's
he was also protected by the Playboy empire.
I did not know that. I'm not surprised. So they're all connected, all the sex industries.
Cosby had drugged, I know of at least one Playboy bunny. And
oh, sure. Those girls are drugged all the time.
And she didn't come forward because she didn't want to, because she knew that Hugh Hefner and Bill Cosby were very, very good friends.
Oh,
and she knew that she would lose her job.
Oh, absolutely.
If she said anything about it. So, and I'm sure that Bill Cosby, I'm extrapolating that Bill Cosby did that to a number of bunnies, because he was always at the Playboy mansion. And there's a docuseries that's come out about the Hugh Hefner and the Playboy empire, and
The Secrets of Playboy. Is it called The Secrets of Playboy?
Yes. And
I saw that. Yeah.
And that really does show that Cosby probably drugged and molested numerous Playboy bunnies. I mean, Hefner's friends could do whatever he wanted with whatever they wanted with those girls.
Well, those women were considered property of Hugh. If he decided to give one away or say go, it's the same with Jeffrey Epstein, the way he treated Virginia. She was told to go have sex with certain people, allegedly Prince Andrew, among others, and told, you need to do this for me because, and you need to do this, do whatever he wants. You need to make him happy, because they wanted the benefits of what they could get from Prince Andrew if they were able to provide him with that kind of experience. So they use these women like cattle, like they're just, it's truly the pure misogyny, no sense at all. These are people with feelings, with hearts, with souls. They're just commodities to these men, and the women get swept into it. And then oftentimes the women are coerced or pressured by financial need or whatever. And they end up doing something that then could be used against them, and they'll never be credible again. Now they're stuck in a system. For example, Bill Cosby he had a relationship with a modeling agency in New York, and he would say, send me your new models, send me the ones who are really broke. So he specifically looked for girls who did not have any money, who were desperately looking for a job. You know, and I've had some people, I had someone in Malibu, a female in Malibu, tell me that her father was in the industry, and she said, Deana, you don't know what these girls are like. She goes, they will do anything to be a movie star or to try to be a movie star. She goes, you just don't understand these women and how they are. But what I do know is that girls have dreams too. And Jeffrey Epstein, for example, would play on their dreams. One of the most attractive girls was in a private school in New York, and someone spotted her waiting for her mom to pick her up one day. And, you know, I think it was Ghislaine Maxwell who went to her and said, hey, I have an older man who wants to help your career, thinks you're really pretty and really talented or whatever. And these girls are naive enough and desperate enough for money that they'll actually listen or go give them a massage or whatever it is, because they think some philanthropist wants to help their career. So did the girls do things that were wrong? I don't know. I mean, people have dreams. Someone comes along and tells them I can make tells him, I can make your dreams come true. Like Jeffrey Epstein told Virginia, I will put you through NYU. Her dream was to get a degree from NYU and buy her a car. Never got the car, never got the NYU degree. So they played on these women's desires. And in Hollywood, it's the same thing. I mean, most actresses are looking for attention. They're not really healthy people. If you're looking for everyone else to look at you, there's something wrong with you, in my opinion. I think most actors and actresses have some really serious problems. They need to go back and figure out what happened in their childhood. Maybe they didn't get enough attention. I don't know what it is, but it's really not healthy to be looking for accolades from others. I don't think that's really the way to have a happy life. But you know, so there's it's sort of a give and take. You know, it's the women aren't completely innocent, but you know, they're also, they didn't deserve what they got. And same with the Playboy. Those girls, a lot of them came from poor backgrounds, and they wanted a shot at having a good life. And they got into these situations where they were abused and drugged and raped because they were looking for a way out. Same with Jeffrey Epstein. He would actually go out and look for girls on the wrong side of the tracks, girls who lived in trailer parks, girls who worked at the mall, because they knew the girls working at the mall were making $5 or $6 an hour back then. And he was offering them, what, $200 for a 1 hour massage when the going rate was $100 for an actual masseuse back then. This is 2005 timeframe. So money was used every step of the way to coax, entice, and, you know, get these girls sort of vulnerable because they needed money. And Jeffrey Epstein put up girls who just came to the country in this hotel he owned, or this
apartment building.
Right. And so these women didn't even have their documents that they needed to go out and get work, and they were stuck in this apartment. They were told they were going to have a free apartment and told they're going to have a modeling contract. But when they got here, they had this crappy apartment. They didn't have any food. They didn't have any money. They didn't have documents. So they entice women. And again, some people want to blame these girls and say, well, they shouldn't have been looking to be models. Why would they be doing that? Why are they so full of themselves? They want to be a model. Well, maybe because it was all they had. Maybe they didn't have a way out. So I think it's really easy for some people to blame the girls and say that only a certain type of girl got drawn into Jeffrey Epstein's web. But to me, it's not that simple. These are girls who have backgrounds. Most of Jeffrey Epstein's victims had a CPS file, Child Protective Services file. These girls were in the system already. They've been beaten or assaulted by stepdads, brothers, whatever, came from very poor areas. So they targeted the vulnerable people. All of them did. Weinstein did, Cosby did, Epstein did. And one of the things that Weinstein did, I was telling one of my former professors from Berkeley, I was saying, you know, he had like a whole smorgasbord of ways he treated women. Like some of them, like Uma Thurman, not Thurman, the famous actress who's in Kill Bill.
Uma Thurman.
It is Uma Thurman. Okay.
Yeah.
She actually got probably the worst of anyone, but in the short run, she was able to get away from him. He didn't actually pin her down and rape her. He did that to some girls, but she had enough power. Her dad was influential. I think her dad was a professor. Her dad knew the Dalai Lama. I mean, she had enough connection and power that he didn't actually physically rape her. She was able to go get away. Other girls, he would just plain rape. Girls who had no money, no means, no dads with power. But what they did to Uma Thurman was especially egregious because Harvey Weinstein funded all of Quentin Tarantino's movies, all of them. Quentin Tarantino would have nothing without Harvey Weinstein. Well, Quentin Tarantino and Uma Thurman met, they actually, I think, conceived of the Kill Bill series together. And at one point, she had told him what Harvey Weinstein did to her. And Harvey Weinstein then very sheepishly said that he was sorry to her. But then Quentin Tarantino was directing the movie, and he told her to get into a car and drive at 40 miles an hour or else her hair wouldn't blow the right way. And the people in the crew were saying, no, you can't drive that car. That car's completely out of control. She'll lose control of the car. You can't do that. And he said, get in and do it now. He's the director. And you cross a director, it's like crossing your military sergeant, you're done. So she did get in the car. She got to go 40 miles an hour, and she immediately lost control and crashed into a tree. And she said her legs went up under her chin and the pain was excruciating. She thought she'd never walk again. She accused Quentin Tarantino of trying to kill her, and he went off like a nut. But what he did to her was cause her permanent injuries. And this was on the heels of her telling him what Harvey Weinstein did to her, and Harvey Weinstein apologizing. But it sounds to me, just looking at the facts, these two men made her pay for her disclosure of what Harvey Weinstein did to her.
I've been looking at child trafficking for 21 years. And one thing that I know for sure is these major predators, they're quite skilled at preying upon victims. They know exactly the right buttons to push. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's a career, whatever it might be, they're highly skilled. And we were talking about that docuseries about Playboy, and my mother had the wisdom to leave my biological father at a relatively young age. I was an infant, and she moved to Chicago, and she got a job as a Playboy bunny. And she took me there, and we lived with another bunny. And so my youth was kind of filled with bunnies. It's kind of interesting. And I know that this might sound fabricated, but my first memory is my mother hanging up her tails and her ears in the closet, getting them back from the dry cleaner. And then I went on and I wrote for Playboy. And so I looked at Playboy. I was in denial about Playboy. I mean, I looked at Playboy as somewhat benign, and it didn't have the hardcore pornography of like Screw magazine or these other magazines. So I was stunned when I watched this docuseries and I saw what a monster Hugh Hefner was, and this urbane gentleman that he projected when he was on television. It was it's kind of amazing. In King Lear, one of the characters says, "The Prince of Darkness will come as a gentleman," and that was certainly the case with Hugh Hefner. He was the Prince of Darkness, and what he was he was making some of those girls engage in bestiality. I mean,
disgusting.
Just
and once again,
unbelievably deviant.
I always thought he was hideous. I always thought Hugh Hefner was absolutely ugly as a man. I don't know how people thought he was attractive. I don't see it. Same with Jeffrey Epstein. I think he's weird looking. There's something wrong with his head is too long, and I can't put my finger on it, but these men to me always looked like there's something wrong with them. So I don't know if that's just intuition or what, but I find Hugh Hefner truly repulsive. Even as a young man, I've seen him, in the younger films and videos, and I'm like, okay, he still wasn't attractive. I mean, he might have been, he was lean at least. I mean, it wasn't like he was the ugliest man on planet Earth, but again, these are people who did not do well with women until they got rich. And then it's almost like they want to, it's payback time. Now I can do things to women who rejected me as a youth, right? There's a real attitude among these guys. When I was looking at a lot of the descriptions of how they treated women, the things they said to women, and the way they exploited so many women when they had the money to do so.
My mother told me that Hugh Hefner wanted her to move into the mansion. This is when he was in Chicago. And then he found out about me, and then he decided that he didn't want my mother to move into the mansion. I think my mother was very grateful about that. But when I've talked to my mom about it, I mean, some of these bunnies just went through hell. I mean, but I don't think my mom had a difficult, I don't think that she had the difficulties of a lot of these other women. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I looked at Playboy as somewhat benign.
Remember, things changed. The bunnies were not playmates. The bunnies were not all playmates. Some of them were, but I think many, many bunnies were working at these Playboy bars, right? That came up, and they had the little costume, and they dressed up like that, and that was just part of the theme of the bars. But they weren't all playmates, because in the documentary The Secrets of Playboy, what we learned was that every single playmate pretty much had to sleep with Hugh Hefner, or they couldn't get the position. And certainly the playmates of the year, also, Hugh Hefner. But there was also this sort of second set of pretty young women who could make a lot of money on tips by wearing a little bunny tail and wearing little ears at a bar. And I could see a lot of women doing that. That doesn't mean they were ever raped, doesn't mean they ever had to take their clothes off for photos. So back then it was different. I think over time became a situation where we don't have the bunny bars anymore. First of all, you don't have the women who had the positions your mother had. Those are gone. Now it's all playmates and, these girls
and women that want to be playmates.
Naked photos, right? Girls who want to be playmates, whether or not they are playmates, right?
Harvey Weinstein is a truly repugnant individual.
Everywhere.
Your descriptions of him were very apt, I thought. And he played an integral role in fostering the MeToo movement, which was something that was good that came out of that. What do you think of the MeToo movement?
Well, the MeToo movement never really got started. It's one of the things I'm going to be doing with my 501c3 Lord Advocates. I'm going to have a subsection to really get it started. It never started. It's like the MeToo movement was sort of like lacing up its shoes, right? It never got running. And it never got running because you didn't have the right people involved, in my opinion. You need lawyers. You need really, really good lawyers to go into the courts, bring these guys to justice, and send a message that this will not be tolerated. And if the judges do the wrong thing, you need really good lawyers who are connected to some people in the House of Representatives who can bring articles of impeachment against those federal judges. And whether or not they're convicted by the Senate isn't necessarily the end of the story. When a federal judge is impeached like that, it gets all over town. I mean, there's social sanctions too. So I don't feel the MeToo movement ever really got started. It sort of was a thing where, we're going to have this movement. It's like, when is it going to get going? When are all the private lawsuits?
When is it going to move?
And what's happened too, what we found out is that these people in Hollywood and elsewhere were aware that sooner or later you're going to have, a bunch of female lawyers who are going to say this is enough. No, we're not going to allow this. So what they did, they started years ago. All of the women had to sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. So, once you sign that non-disclosure agreement, you oftentimes have lost your ability to sue, but they can't stop you from testifying in a criminal trial. And I would argue those NDAs were influenced in a way that may make them voidable anyway. I think there was so much duress and coercion involved. I happen to have an expertise on consent and the many, many aspects of consent. Age, of course, we know that, mental infirmity, of course. There's also a sort of a growing trend to recognize economic duress, which was never recognized in the law other than in Title VII. Title VII does recognize that if someone is coerced through financial pressure to have sex, and it was consensual, but it was unwanted, that is actionable under Title VII. But until then, there's just been nothing. And in the general common law, nope. Economic duress, economic coercion did not vitiate consent until very recently, just a few cases. I actually wrote a chapter of a book on this, and I got it's been waylaid. That was the book I was writing when I came across the Jeffrey Epstein case. And it's like I went down a rabbit hole and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So I went to write a book about him and Harvey Weinstein. That became two separate books. And the original book called Sex Torts has not even been finished. I have an article called Sex Torts in Minnesota Law Review from 2007, and an intentional sex torts in Fordham Law Review in 2008. But the book has a very detailed chapter about all the ways that consent can be vitiated or rendered ineffective. And we're just finally seeing, lying, defrauding people into sexual relations. We're just starting to get some traction in the United Kingdom and Israel. People lying about whether they're married or not, and getting a woman to have sex with them and finding out, oh my gosh, he's married. That's been that sort of thing has been sufficient to sustain rape charges in other parts of the country. So here, and this is something people should pay attention to, we need some really feisty warrior lawyers, male or female, doesn't matter, to go after these cases and start pressing that law. The law has just begun, it's trending, but it's sort of been shut down by COVID. So COVID comes along And all of a sudden, these cases that just came out, like in 2018, 2019, I mean, one guy promised to wear a condom. I think it was a United Kingdom case, as I recall. And he apparently, in the heat of passion, he either took it off, or I'm not sure what he did, but she found out that she wasn't protected, and she sued him. Or I'm sorry, she asked the prosecutor to prosecute him, and he was prosecuted, and he was convicted, as I recall, for this particular action of promising, because her consent didn't extend to unprotected sex. It's one thing to say, I consent to sex with a condom. It's another thing to say, I consent to sex without a condom. And that was the distinguishing characteristic, just like in the sex tort cases, where someone fails to disclose they have herpes. And agreeing to have sex with someone is not the same as agreeing to have sex with someone who has herpes. The risks are very, very different. And so that's the body of law I was talking about, the sexual context and the MeToo movement that, again, I think hasn't really started. So I do plan to work on that as well as part of my Lord Advocates charitable organization, which is all about litigation and education. We're going to fight for people, and not just women. You know, if we get a man who comes to us and says, I've been falsely accused of rape, or I've been falsely accused of sexual harassment, and I need help. If we do our due diligence and we believe he's right, because that happens too, we will represent him. See, it's not about left or right or male or female. It's about right and wrong. And that's what I am going to, that's a core value of my organization, is just helping the innocent one, helping the right person.
Circling back to Me Too, I've been very disappointed with Me Too. I've reached out to a couple of people at Me Too and asked them to, I put on a demonstration about the Epstein cover-up during Ghislaine Maxwell's trial. And I reached out to a couple of people in Me Too, and they showed no desire whatsoever to help the Epstein victims. And I also know of an Epstein victim that has reached out to Me Too, and she was told that Me Too had no desire whatsoever to help the Epstein victims. And I just find that mind-boggling. That
now, wait a minute, but you know what happened, right? You know that Bill Gates gave the Me Too movement $1 million, and all of a sudden it got quiet. Bill Gates was friends with Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes.
Bill Gates shut down the Me Too movement, in my opinion, by giving him a bunch of money and having him do studies and reports. Who cares about studies and reports? We know what's going on. We don't need any more studies or reports. We need action. We need action in the courts. We need action in the legislatures. That's a function of Bill Gates's evil right there. He put money into the Me Too movement, and he was able to capture them. He's captured Bill Gates and the billionaires. They have captured a lot of aspects of our society and our government, not just, the World Health Organization and the, CDC, FDA. I mean, it is deep. And I've also contacted the Me Too movement, and here I am, a person who wrote sex torts, which was no one had even coined that term before I coined it back in 2005. It was actually published in 2007 in Minnesota, but you would think that I was a law professor with an expertise in this area of law. They didn't even get back to me. So that tells me something. As soon as an organization or a movement starts getting any power at all or any traction at all, someone comes along and captures them. It's not going to happen to me. I can tell you that. It's not possible with me, but I know that people have told me I've been shadow banned on the internet. I'm probably true. But some of us have to stand up for what's right. We can't live in fear. We have to trust. And that's where I am. I'm going to, as soon as I find the time, I'm going to start bringing some cases and making some noise about what's going on.
Deana, I want to thank you for coming on the Nick Bryant podcast.
Absolutely, Nick. I'm a fan of yours. I think you know that. I'm so happy to be able to talk to you, and we'll do my podcast next.
Absolutely. Have a great night.
Thanks, Nick. You too. Bye.
Bye.